Today we are taking a listener question. Does the Bible command current married Christian couples to have kids? That's what's today on the To Be the Church podcast. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas.
This is the Friday before Christmas episode. We're recording it less than a week before Christmas. Any family traditions coming up next week that you're excited about?
Christmas Eve gatherings.
Yep. Christmas Eve gatherings.
Do you remember the years when we didn't do this? You remember the
Yeah,
years
a few years in there,
Yeah, we had like a few years where we were like, people don't want to do
Really?
that.
Yeah.
Like, we'll just like be with your families. And like, we'd even give like resource for them to be with their families.
Yeah.
And then I think, maybe was it you that showed up to like another church's Christmas Eve gathering? And then like, you're like, oh, half our church is here. We should probably have these.
Yeah. Yeah, that happened. Yeah.
Wow.
2013, 2014-ish. And then we brought it back in like, I don't know, 2016 maybe.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, and then it was packed. We did one of them. I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to show up. And it was like a capacity. And I was like, man, we probably should have been doing these. Yep.
Yeah.
That was kind of the early days, dude. We're
Yeah.
like, man, there's like we kind of, we cleared the calendar and revitalization and trying to figure out what was there. But yeah. Anyway,
Well, here we are.
Here we are.
Ben, you're
I
smiling.
always
as
do
if-
Christmas Eve
yeah,
gatherings.
You're like, dude,
like the
what
Bible says to do.
what idiots are these guys? Right? That was the, okay.
I just wish I would have known you guys back then.
Yeah.
I hear lots of stories, but
We had our staff Christmas party a couple weeks ago. And like, my favorite part of the Christmas party was recounting the good old days. Like, back whenever the staff looked like was just a different iteration of it, and like we all kind of had less to do, and so like there was just like we were all kids kind of too, and so it was like Cody and Max, and when Cody, Max, and I shared an office, and just like what that whole dynamic was like, and
I was here for a little bit of that.
Yeah.
The green room.
yeah, that was fun. But all right, let's jump right in. So baby Jesus
Yes.
was born as a child. And we have a question about having children. We've had this question for quite a while, and we wanted to save it for Christmas week so that we could correlate it to baby Jesus' birth. That's not true at
Very
all.
intentional.
Yeah. But this question did come in a while ago, and we haven't had the opportunity to talk about it yet. So let's jump right in. It says this: does the Bible command current married Christian couples to have children? Okay, so that's the big question. And then here's some other some side notes here. There were definitely commands in the Old Testament, but are there in the New Testament, and do they apply to us now? If so, are there any valid reasons that Christians can have for choosing to not have children if they physically can? I've heard various reasons given and have been told that some reasons are valid while others are not. Money has been a reason given from different perspectives as well. One, I don't have enough money and can't afford it right now. Would God would provide me with more money if he wanted me to have kids. Number two, I don't have enough money, but my lifestyle spending would have to change if we had a child, and I don't want that. That seemed to be a selfish reason, the question asker says. Could number one also be seen as needing to change your current lifestyle, and therefore no different than reason two? I've also heard a valid reason for not having kids is that the couple serves other people's kids instead. So the time that would be taken up by their own kids, they choose to spend with others instead, serving in the nursery, youth group, mentoring, etc. What about couples who have kids and still do this? Doesn't this seem valid? Doesn't seem valid to me. Okay, what if someone has never had a desire to have kids? Wouldn't God give them that desire if he wanted them to have kids? I've heard some people say that every time you have sex, you should be open to having a child. Obviously, that is a possible outcome, but then how does family planning play into this? Whether it is birth control, condoms, timing with ovulation, etc. We're getting in the weeds here. Are we playing God and not being as open to having a child with any or all these methods? If one couple is choosing to never have kids while another is choosing to not have kids right now, what's the difference? Are both couples disobeying God's command to have children? There's more here, but I think that's probably enough to go on for now. And then there's an asterisk at the bottom. This question is for couples who physically can have kids but choose not to, not those who want to and have tried but are unable to for various reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, so
We could go a million directions with this, obviously, and it even got into like birth control and all that kind of jazz. But Ben, where are we going to go with it? I do think that
you're the most qualified. You have the most recent
you
child.
just had a child.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Tyler and I both have 4 children apiece, but like what You're now in the 4 Children Club,
Yep.
right? Welcome.
Yep.
You've been here a little while. Look at this young guy. He's just getting here. Hey,
Yeah.
buddy. Welcome. But no, I think
So there are a million different ways we can answer this. Could you tell us one, Andrew?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me, and it's a very thorough question, and
I
we
can
really
answer. I was
appreciate
just
it.
kidding,
Yeah,
if
I'm
you
just
want.
kidding. But I think the thing that stands out to me is kind of the mission of having children, and should Christian couples have children? Is there valid reasons not to? And like, is this a command biblically? And kind of teasing that out a bit. You know what I'm saying? Would probably be
Yeah, I have some thoughts.
the way to go.
So I was kind of thinking through this question, and there are some biblical truths that we need to consider that I think would kind of shape the answer here. So first, kind of just basic one, God's original plan and design was for one man, one woman to get married and to have children. This is Genesis 1, 27, 28. God creates man in his own image, male and female, and blessed them. And he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So this is the creation account revealing God's original intent, right? Marriage is God's idea. Being fruitful and multiply is a mandate that God gives to Adam and Eve. And so that's something to consider. We also need to consider that after the fall, God still commands human beings to procreate. So Genesis 9:1, after Noah and the flood, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And actually, I know Andrew's preached through Genesis. I've preached to the first part of Genesis so far. We actually see this mandate repeated multiple times throughout the book of Genesis. So we can't say that the fall did something where this was now not God's intent or plan or command, because he continues to command it even after sin enters the world. Another biblical data point that we have to consider, Psalm 127:3, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. So the Bible is really clear. Children are a blessing. They're a precious gift from the Lord. They are a good thing, right? That when God gives them, they are to be received as a gracious gift from him. Another thing to consider is that in the Old and New Testaments, there is an assumption that having children is a normal and common thing for people to do to follow God's design and mandate. So examples of this, in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20:12, one of the 10 is honor your father and mother, right? So that's assuming that there's going to be these parental relationships, and that how those relationships function matters to God. He reveals in his law how those are to function. As we get to the New Testament, Jesus, even in some of his teaching, Matthew 7:11, if you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So Jesus is assuming that people have children, that this is a normal, good thing. In the epistles, in Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3, children, obey your parents. Fathers, don't provoke your children. So Paul's giving instruction, assuming that there will be parents and children. So that's another just kind of biblical data point, that this seems to be normative, that people have children, and that's a good thing. So with all of this in mind, and kind of just these biblical truths about God's plan and parents and children, it seems like the Bible reveals that it's God's design that people be married and have children, and that this is a natural, good, blessed, and expected thing, right? It's normative. That seems to be what the Bible teaches. Now, with all that in mind, there's one more thing from the Bible that we should consider. So that's not the whole story, what I've shared so far. So some Christians may feel called by God not to marry. And if they're called not to marry, and we believe the Bible reveals that kids should come from a marriage relationship, then they would be feeling called not only to not be married, but to not have kids. And they might feel called to do this because they want to be free to serve the Lord with even more freedom and devotion. And this was actually the Apostle Paul's call, and something that he writes about in 1 Corinthians 7. So he says in 1 Corinthians 7:6, now as a concession, not a command, I say this, I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. He goes on to say in verse 17, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. And then later in chapter 7, he talks about why he would desire people not to be married, so that they'd be free from anxieties, that the unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. And so Paul's making the point that to not be married is a good thing for some, because when you get married, there are now new responsibilities, new stressors, new things that you need to focus on, which mean naturally you're not going to be able to do as much for the Lord. And so think about it, like if us three were not married and didn't have children, we would be able to give more time to ministry, right? One of the reasons we don't give 100 hours a week is because we're trying to be good fathers and husbands and those sorts of things. So what he says is that there's no problem to get married. Getting married is a good thing. But for some, God may call you not to do that so that you can focus on serving the Lord. And so because marriage and children are connected, I think that passage of scripture can apply to this reality that for some, they may feel God calls them not to be married and not to have kids so that they can use their gifts to serve the Lord with a sense of freedom and devotion that they couldn't have if they started a family. So I'll conclude with this, and then you guys can give your two cents on this. The big question for a Christian person or couple who do not want to have children is why. That's what I would ask them. Why don't you want to have kids?
Yeah.
Is it because it would be hard? Because it would require sacrifice and selflessness? If that's the case, I would say that's not a good reason to not have kids. The reality is that having kids is hard. I say that as someone with a 5-week-old at home. But there is blessing and joy in the sacrifice, especially in having children. There's joy in that. And this is what I would say to someone who's asking about any sort of decision in life. The goal of the Christian life is not to avoid hardship by any means possible, right? In fact, the Bible is really clear that through hardship and trial and sacrifice, God sanctifies us and grows us. And so if you don't want to have kids because you're afraid it might be uncomfortable or it might mess up with what you want to do, and it's kind of selfish at the end of the day, I would say that's not a good reason to have kids. And it will be hard and it will require selflessness, but there's actually great joy in that and sanctification that is possible. I'm sure all of us would say that having kids has been something God's used to sanctify us in a lot of ways. And ultimately that leads to joy. The other thing I'd say though is if you feel called not to have kids or to marry because it will allow you to be the church more effectively, to use your gifts and minister in the way God has called you to, and you've discerned that by much prayer, reflection, and in Christian community, seeking out other people, other Christians to speak into your life, then I would say that is a legitimate God-honoring and good thing. I don't have any problem with that if you feel like that's what God has called you to. And so my personal experience and advice would be, if someone asked me, should I have kids? I'd say yes, do it. You won't regret it. God will sanctify you through it and it'll bring you joy. But if he calls you to something different, that's legitimate too. So
It's great. Good stuff, dude.
that's what I would say.
Yeah, and really good stuff. And I there's an article we're going to put in the show notes called "Are Christian Couples Required to Have Kids?" DesiringGod.org, and that'll be in the show notes. And you actually covered a lot from that article. Obviously, it's looking at a scriptural and kind of biblical worldview on children, and so there's overlap with sort of the stuff that you were talking about there, Ben. And one of the lines in it, I think this is Piper wrote it. Yeah, Jonathan Piper.
Johnny P.
Johnny P. He said, it is normal, beautiful, fitting, natural, and normative, according to Scripture, both explicitly and I would say implicitly in many places, for a married couple to have children. This was God's plan from the moment of creation. It was part of what was very good, right? Genesis 1:28. But then, as you said, Ben, post-flood, that was reaffirmed in Genesis 9, right? So, and what I really love about this article, there's like 5 or 6 observations he makes. I think it's 5 observations. And I think like what it challenges, and I think what you were getting at, Ben, as well, and said quite clearly, like a biblical worldview, right? Like there's so many things from the spirit of our age, so many reasons that we could think of from our world today to not have children. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, you've seen it in the political realm of like, people say, well, because of global warming, like people need to stop having children. And there's definitely even like the birth rate as it relates to United States and the Western world. Europe is really struggling in this sense of the birth rate not being at replacement rate, and it is somewhat of a thing there. So I think for Christians specifically, the biblical worldview would lead toward for those who are married and those who are able, infertility is a thing, and many people struggle through that. And I would encourage those in that, as they're trusting the Lord through that, to consider foster care, adoption, ways that the Lord might be leading them to care for children or to bring children into their home. But for those who, and Tyler, you said at the end of that question, for those who like are capable of having children, right, and are Christians, and what would the Lord have me do here? Like if somebody just came to me personally on that, like what do you think? I would say have kids and have like as many of them as possible. I guess that would be my advice. That has been my advice to people I've been in premarital, couples that I've counseled or married. Not only have kids, but have as many as you can, and raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And I honestly, that was our approach, Carissa and I. We had 5 pregnancies in 8 years. One of those was a miscarriage, but we had 4 daughters. And we would both say we would have had a few more kids had we been able to have more kids. Carissa had a lot of really rough pregnancies, and so she actually was not able to have kids after our last anymore. So, I think like, and Tyler, you've had, you guys have had 3 kids, biological kids, and you've done adoption as well. And so maybe you could speak to that in terms of that. But I do think this is normative. The scriptures are really weighted in one direction on this. Children are a blessing. They're a heritage of the Lord. Be fruitful and multiply. And the realities of everything the question spoke to and everything you said, Ben, I would affirm as well, is like it is a struggle. It is difficult. It is costly financially and in every other way, but like the blessing of God in that and is tremendous. And thinking about who our children, particularly, and this is why I say this to Christian couples in premarital counseling and marriage counseling, these things of like have a lot of kids, because if you're raising them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, rooted in the local church, like this is an army that the Lord is building, right? And so evangelistically and for the sake of the gospel, like what these children who are raised to love Jesus can do and be is quite the vision for us, I think, as Christian parents to pray toward and to work toward together in community. So what do you got, Ty? As the only of the 3 of us here who has adopted.
I don't know. I have a few thoughts. I think that like, one, we've given the caveat of like physically able to. It could be worth the discussion, and maybe it's today, maybe it's another time, on pastorally, like how to comfort and counsel those who can't.
Yeah,
or who like have had difficulty in that. That's a very real thing. That's extremely painful for a lot of people, and so I don't want to like brush past that. But it might be another episode. I think that. I hadn't even really thought about it, Ben, from like the Paul perspective of like, I wish everyone was like I was. And then there's also the only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him, and to which God has called him. And so, my thought, as you're saying, have as many kids as you possibly can, is I would maybe caveat this, and maybe you'd say no, slap the caveat away, but of like I would say be realistic about your like legitimate capacity, not your like, oh, I don't like how much
not
work
your
this
preference
is,
right,
but I hit a point after 4 kids, 1 adopted, that I was like I think that I'm like at the spot where like I have enough trouble being a good dad to these 4, to where like I think that like the amount of grace I would need for a 5th one, like I don't know if that much grace exists.
Okay, wait.
No, I'm just
All
kidding.
right, we're doing this right now. Tyler, do you really believe that much grace exists?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah, but like,
Are you going to have another child?
no. But like, I think that's the, like, I don't know. I think that there's wisdom in like, okay, like the way that we want to parent is like intentional and time, like one-on-one time is important.
Yeah.
And like the ability to have one-on-one time with 7 kids is different than 3, is different than 1, is different than 5.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And now that doesn't mean I think there's a magic number. I'll look at some parents, I'm like, you're killing it with your 6 kids or whatever it is, you know, like that's
Or 12.
Yeah, insane. Like, and I'm like, that's really impressive. And I,
The Duggars, right? Everything was
Stop
good
it.
good out of that.
I don't know what that is.
You don't know who the Duggars are?
I barely
Are they
know
like
who
the
they are.
19 kids and counting?
Oh,
All right.
I was thinking there.
We digress. No, but Ty, so what I hear you saying, and this is good, is like, because I hear that caveat, and I think and I was joking with you a little bit, but also not, that like you should have another kid, and also there's enough grace for that. But then 2, you're saying like the command to raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, like the things told to us as parents in the scriptures are real things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying, consider those. Don't just be like, you certainly don't want to be like pumping out kids and then being an irresponsible parent, right?
Right.
You want to be raising them to know the Lord. You want to be intentional. You want to be doing those things. And so you prayerfully consider that, right? As you're going along, like you want to provide for your children, you want to do all those things. And so, yeah, so it's like procreate and do it in a responsible way, and as you do, make sure that you're intentional and that you're raising your kids well and those type of deal. But but dude, I just remember the days when you had a couple, right, 2 kids, and then you were maybe not thinking you might have any more. Now you have 4, and I'm here for Tyler and Katie having 9 children. So
don't put that evil on me. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. That's Ricky Bobby quote. Sorry.
Okay, you got the Duggars, Ben. You got Ricky Bobby. I'm here trying to do a podcast because I love people. Okay. So.
Yeah, and I think so our game plan as a family was to like have 2 biological kids and then adopt 2. And then in the midst of the adoption, we got pregnant with Jameis. And there is a beautiful reality in like of that. I can't imagine life without Jameis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're talking about having miscarriages. We had a miscarriage between Molly and Lennon. And it is a very wild reality to think that like had like things been different, we would have a different child and Lennon would not exist, and it's like, praise God for his, providence. And it didn't feel comforting in the moment by any means. And then, like, I don't want that to sound like dismissive of somebody else's, miscarriages or anything like that, like at all. But there's that reality of like, oh man, I can't imagine life without, Jameis or Lennon or
and that's going to be like, I totally affirm what you're saying about responsibility and knowing your capacity and all that. But if you end up having more kids, or if anyone ends up having more kids, you're not going to regret it, right? You're not going to regret this human life whom you love more than anything. Like, so yeah, I think, when I was in my 20s, I had lots of friends. We had lots of friend couples who were very like, oh, we're not ready. They were trying to, structure their life in such a way where they're like, we were going to be ready. And it was just like, you're never really ready, right, to have kids. And so like, yes, be responsible, think through things. But like, there is a certain point where you just have to, like the Kevin DeYoung book, just do something, right? Trust God and just like, make a decision. Start procreating, as you said.
Yeah. There's a piece of this question, and I don't know if I got to this part. In the original question, or if I'd stopped by then, but there's the spot that says, this could also imply, just this whole conversation, that if you don't want kids, you should not get married. If having kids is a command related to marriage. So when you're looking at Paul's words in 1 Corinthians, like it seemed like you were, kind of leaning on to the, like, let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him. Like you can be more devoted to ministry. I've met couples before who have said like, and they're like global missionaries, where they're like, we have chosen not to have children as a way to serve the Lord, like more focused on a specific task. Now, that's not diminishing the raising of kids as a ministry by any means, but like, you know, and so what would you say to that, to the person who says like, if I don't want kids, should I not get married?
That example you gave seems like a legitimate, like they're not doing that for the sake of the call to ministry and serving well. It does seem though, like biblically marriage and having children are like a thing together, right? They're inextricably linked. You know, so I mean, I can't imagine that if Paul did get married that he would then not have kids. Like that was just something that was normative for you to do. And so, I don't know. What do you think? Like,
No, I think they go together for sure. And I think that like it's and that you mentioned that missionary thing, that article that we'll have in the show notes there, which I would really commend the question asker to read, just, or anybody wondering about this question to read. Pretty succinct. He does talk about that in there a little bit, and sort of some of the, and what he's getting at is like a biblical worldview versus like a worldly worldview. And so, just I'd say read that article from desiringgod.org and get some thoughts on that. But yeah, I do think those are linked, and I think that that idea, Ty, that you had, and which was bridging into the birth control. The Roman Catholic Church kind of has some teaching on that over the years, and like that birth control is like not allowed kind of thing, and that's a whole other podcast. We're kind of growing long already here, but yeah, so there are some of those things within that. It's like on the one side, should Christian couples consider whether or not to have children? On the other side, should Christian couples do anything to prevent having children? You know, and so those are two different sides of the same coin. I think we've handled the first side of it here a bit, but the second one would have to wait for another episode. Dude, I feel like we have a birth control episode, don't we? In our archive?
I mean, we have almost 500 of them now, so probably.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I think of the 1997 Tim Allen movie Jungle to Jungle.
Yep.
Where
changed my life.
He finds out that he has a son that Elizabeth been growing up in the Amazon, and he tells his new wife about it, and she says, when we talked about having kids, we decided that I would be your child and you would be my child. So are you guys saying that that's not valid? Have a good week.